Welcome back to the deep dive. So you sent us this really interesting pile of stuff notes, articles, reflections, all centered on escapism and this thing called theater of the mind.
Yeah, it's quite a collection, isn't it? Lots of thoughts on, definitions, how different media work, and how the whole modern digital scene might be shaping us.
Absolutely. So our mission today, I guess, is to unpack all that. What is theater of the mind? How does it sort of clash with or maybe get flattened by how we consume things now?
And crucially, how does it connect to why we escaped in the first place? And what does that mean for you listening right now, how you think, feel, engage with things?
Right. It feels like the big question hanging over these sources is, when you're lost in a story, are you just, like, passively watching a pre-built world?
Or are you actually in there building it yourself inside your own head? It's a fundamental difference.
Okay, let's get stuck into it. First up, what exactly is this theater of the mind?
Well, the core idea, based on the material, is it refers to those experiences where you, the audience, construct the world internally.
So not just seeing it laid out for you.
Exactly. Instead of explicit visuals, you're using narrative clues, sound, suggestion, maybe abstract prompts. Your own mind is doing the imaginative heavy lifting.
Okay, I think I get it. Like,
Think about classic radio dramas, right? Or podcasts. The sound design, the voices, they spark images in your head. You have to paint the scene based on what you hear.
or tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons, especially, old school style with maybe just graph paper, not fancy maps.
Precisely. The Dungeon Master describes a crumbling tower, and boom, you're picturing it. The creaky stairs, the shadows, the monster, all from their words.
And just reading a book, I suppose. That's the most common one.
Probably, yeah. When you read, you decide what the hero looks like, the feel of the place, how their voice sounds in your head. The author gives you the blueprint, but you're the director and the set designer.
Gotcha. So the key is this idea of cognitive co-creation. The media gives you prompts, but you have to actively fill in the blanks. Your mind is the stage.
That's basically it. And that leads us right into the contrast these sources draw between this active theater and what they call passive media.
Right. How does that play out? What's the difference for our minds?
Well, take reading versus watching a movie. Reading, like we said, it demands constant mental effort. Visualizing, reasoning, inferring.
Yeah.
It's work, right?
Yeah, you're actively engaged. But watching a film,
The work's mostly done for you. The camera shows the scene, the actors emote, the editing sets the pace. Your imagination is kind of outsourced.
okay.
And these sources argue that this matters. Regularly flexing that theater of the mind, muscle reading, listening to audio, things that aren't just feeding you visuals,
Right.
it might build up your, let's say, imaginative flexibility, your patience, your inference skills.
Whereas a diet heavy on screens,
Might atrophy those skills over time. Now, it might boost others like visual pattern recognition or emotional mimicry, but it's a trade-off.
that makes intuitive sense. What about the gaming examples? They mentioned guidance versus discovery.
Ugh, yeah. Think about older games, or maybe some indie games today, like Outer Wilds was mentioned. Often, very little hand-holding. You're just dropped in, you have to look around, try stuff, figure it out, imagine solutions.
As opposed to games with constant objective markers, arrows, tutorials for every single thing.
Exactly. Now, that hand-holding can be great for accessibility, less frustration for some players, but the sources suggest it lowers the cognitive challenge. The more a game makes you figure things out, interpret the world, the more it becomes theater of the mind. It rewards that observation, problem solving.
The D&D map example really clicks for me here.
It's a good one, isn't it? DM just describes the room. Players have to visualize. Where's the chest? How big is the orc? Is there cover? Their minds build it.
But lay down a detailed battle map.
And suddenly you see it all. Ambiguity gone. Good for tactics, maybe, but less need for that internal picturing. You become more of a viewer, less of a co-creator of the space.
And bringing it back to audio, the difference between listening to, say, this deep dive versus watching a YouTube video on the same topic.
Well, yeah. Podcasts often demand more active listening, building mental models. You're following arguments, picturing concepts just from sound. A YouTube video, with visuals, text, maybe faster cuts, it can be easier to consume, especially if you're multitasking. Less imaginative strain, maybe?
The sources have that nice comparison. A science podcast might spark questions, building pathways for curiosity. A flashy video might deliver answers, building pathways for retention. Both useful, but different brain workouts.
Totally. And this difference gets even clearer when you look at the specific ways modern media has often produced tactics that seem almost designed to bypass the theater of the mind.
Okay, yeah, this part was really eye-opening in the notes. How modern media might be, like, actively conditioning us away from that internal building. What's the first tactic they mentioned?
The 6-second cut, or even faster now, right? Think about TikTok, Reels, that super rapid editing.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Why does that work?
Apparently, our brains are just wired to notice novelty. Every quick cut triggers the orienting reflex, that old survival thing. What's that new thing? Is it danger? Is it food?
So it keeps jolting your attention back.
And the sources suggest this gives little dopamine hits, like constant tiny rewards. But the downside, it trains your brain to expect that constant change. It wears down your tolerance for stillness, for sustained focus, exactly what you need for theater of the mind.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about all the jump cuts, the zooms, even when someone's just talking to the camera?
Another way to keep the screen dynamic, stop you getting bored visually. It mimics energy. But the psychological effect, according to these sources, can be that you prioritize this sensation over the substance. You remember the feeling, the pace, maybe more than the actual information.
Remembering how it felt more than what was said, that's significant.
It really is. And then sound design. Those musical stings, the whooshes between segments, the dramatic underscores.
They definitely tell you how to feel. Like dun 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 means something bad's about to happen.
Exactly. They guide your emotional response, so you don't have to do as much interpretive work based on the story or acting alone. The media says, feel this now.
And the text on screen. Captions, emojis, titles popping up.
Useful for accessibility, sure, or scrolling with the sound off. But the potential downside highlighted is that it replaces the need for internal narration or really listening closely. The labels are right there, potentially weakening deeper language processing if that's all you get.
And finally, those super bright, high contrast, saturated visuals.
Designed to grab your eye in a crowded feed, right? Aggressively stimulating. But the cognitive cost mentioned is that the more it pops, the more likely you are just to skim it for that visual hit rather than absorbing the content deeply.
So when our media diet is full of this stuff, fast cuts, constant motion, obvious emotional cues, text everywhere, bright colors, what's the cumulative effect? What's the cost?
The sources call it imagination erosion. Basically, these techniques train us to consume, not construct. When you're rarely asked to visualize or infer or sit with ambiguity,
You get worse at it. Less tolerant of things that require effort, less able to build rich mental worlds, maybe less able to emotionally connect with nuance.
that's the anti-theater of the mind effect they described. It's the opposite impulse. And it also leads to shallower processing, less retention. Because it's low effort, easy in, easy out, sensory heavy, it doesn't encode as deeply in memory. You feel entertained maybe, but you don't own the information or the story in the same way.
Is this stuff actually harmful then?
The sources are careful here. They frame it less as good versus bad and more like a nutritional imbalance. Fast food isn't evil, but an only fast food diet. Problems. The harm comes from the dominance, the sheer volume, the habituation to this passive anti-TOTM style. It potentially starves those key cognitive muscles: imagination, attention, patience, interpretation.
And what does that look like in the real world?
Individually. Maybe feeling less creative, finding reading harder, getting restless with quiet or subtlety, things you need for reflection, relationships, problem solving, culturally. The sources speculate it could lead to simpler, more formulaic stories winning out, rewarding clicks over depth, maybe discouraging exploration of complex themes. It normalizes easy comfort content.
But it's not that quick videos or action movies are bad.
Not at all. They have their place: accessibility, relaxation, sheer fun. The danger zone is when that becomes pretty much your only mode of intake, your default setting, like living on sugar alone.
Okay, so if we feel like maybe our imaginative muscles are getting a bit flabby, how do we fight back? How do we reclaim that mental space?
The sources offer some pretty practical ideas. First, just being more mindful, intentionally choosing slow media sometimes, a long podcast, an audiobook, a film that lets scenes breathe.
Allowing yourself to be bored. That sounds tough.
Oh, yeah, it does. But they argue boredom is where creativity sparks. When you aren't constantly fed stimulation, your brain starts making its own connections. It needs that downtime.
Okay, what else? Create, don't just consume.
Exactly. Do things that force you to build worlds yourself. Journaling, sketching, telling stories, playing D&D, writing code, whatever it is. Activities where you're the architect.
And the idea of digital fasting.
Yeah, taking deliberate breaks from the really high stimulation, short form stuff. TikTok, Reels, Shorts, Even just a weekend focusing on lower stimulation things, reading, walks, conversation, can apparently help reset your dopamine tolerance a bit, make it easier to focus later, like recalibrating your brain's settings.
That makes sense. Shifting perspective a bit, how can creators actually make content that engages the theater of the mind today without just being, boring or losing the audience?
It's about intentionally creating space for the audience's imagination. One key thing is audio, relying on voice, sound effects, ambient noise, even silence, to suggest things rather than showing or over-explaining everything.
So instead of showing the whole spooky forest, you just give me the sound of wind in the trees, a twig snapping, maybe an owl hooting far.
Precisely. Let my brain paint the picture. Or using minimal visuals, but making them symbolic. Instead of a character sobbing uncontrollably, maybe just a close-up of a single tear, or like a flickering candle flame representing their state, it invites interpretation.
Leaving gaps in the story, not explaining everything.
Yes. Mystery fuels the theater of the mind. Give pieces, hint at things, allow ambiguity. What you imagine might be happening is often more powerful than what's shown.
And just slowing down.
Pausing.
Absolutely. Letting a moment land gives your brain time to process, to feel, to build. Also, creating moments where the audience feels invited and asking questions, direct address, hinting at things off screen that you have to imagine.
And just the power of good writing and voice acting.
Huge. A skilled narrator or evocative script can conjure images and feelings more effectively than millions in CGI sometimes. And the source is also not to formats like interactive fiction or narrative podcasts with strong character work, things that explicitly blur the line between listener and participant. Okay, but the sources tackle this head on. If this kind of content is maybe less popular on big platforms, does that mean it's just not good? Or niche means bad?
They really push back on that. The argument is algorithms often optimize for easy, quick engagement, not necessarily depth or cognitive richness. People do crave meaningful experiences, they argue. It's just the system doesn't always surface it or reward seeking it out.
So theater of the mind content doesn't get clicks doesn't mean it's worthless.
Exactly. It might be niche, sure, but look at dedicated fan bases for complex games, deep novels, challenging films. It's not worthless at all. The idea isn't that fast is better. It's just that fast is often more addictive.
They called it a cultural sugar addiction. That hits home.
It's a powerful analogy. Easy, sugary stuff is everywhere. Doesn't mean nutrient-dense food requiring more effort isn't valuable. The challenge for creators wanting to do 2TM work, the sources suggest, might be finding clever ways, hybrid formats, short pieces with depth, building community, really leaning into mystery.
Okay, let's bring in the other big piece, escapism. What's the core definition there, according to your sources?
Fundamentally, it's about mentally or emotionally pulling away from your current reality, usually driven by things like stress, boredom, discomfort, or maybe a feeling that something's missing, a desire for more fulfillment. It's a shift in focus, in mood, maybe even identity.
So it's deeper than just distraction or relaxation.
They draw that line, yeah. Distraction might be glancing at your phone for a minute. Leisure is enjoying a hobby. Escapism is more like an immersive psychological flight, often tied to wanting to get away from something specific or a general sense of dissatisfaction. Think binge watching to avoid a problem. That's usually escapism.
And why do we do it? What's the human need behind it?
Several things come up. Regulating tough emotions, anxiety, sadness. Seeking a sense of control or power we don't feel in daily life, exploring different parts of ourselves, different identities through fantasy or role play, or finding meaning and connection that feels lacking elsewhere.
What about the deeper psychological layers mentioned?
Well, it can be a coping mechanism, sometimes subconscious, when reality feels too much. It can also be a way to avoid facing big, maybe uncomfortable existential questions. But critically, the sources emphasize escapism often acts as a mirror.
A mirror, how so?
What you choose to escape into often reflects what you feel you're missing from your real life. If you feel powerless, maybe you escape into superhero stories.
Or if you feel lonely, you escape into stories about intense friendships or romance.
Exactly. It can reveal your unmet needs, your longings, and this is where it ties straight into theater of the mind. Escapism is the why, the motivation for leaving reality. Theater of the mind is often the way the escape is constructed mentally.
Okay, so they both involve stepping outside the everyday, offering some kind of refuge.
Yes, but the key difference is the engagement. Escapism can be totally passive, just numbly consuming content. But theater of the mind is always active. It demands your participation, your mental construction work.
So theater of the mind is a specific kind of escapism. Escapism that requires effort.
That's how the sources position it, yeah. Escapism through creation, not just consumption. It doesn't just whisk you away. It asks you to help build the destination, like listening to an audiobook and picturing it all, or playing that D&D game. It's a joint venture in world building.
And the implication is that this active form is healthier
Uh,
or more meaningful.
They make a strong argument for that. Because it's active, it tends to be more mentally enriching. You're not just passively receiving, you're engaging your imagination, your emotions, your problem-solving skills. Contrast that with purely passive escapism, which the sources suggest can sometimes be more numbing than genuinely restorative.
Why exactly is theater of the mind seen as healthier escapism? What does it do for us?
Well, first, it strengthens imagination. Constantly visualizing, interpreting, that's practice for seeing possibilities, for empathy, understanding perspectives not your own. Second, it builds cognitive endurance. It's often slower, requires more focus, like mental resistance training.
And it creates a different kind of reflective space, too.
Right. Because you're co-creating, the world often reflects you back to yourself. Your hopes, fears, assumptions get projected onto it. And in collaborative forms, like RPGs, it builds real connection through that shared imaginative act.
Which brings us to the big question hanging over all of this.
Yeah.
Is escapism itself good or bad?
The sources are pretty clear. It's not inherently either. It really depends on the why, the how often, and the impact it has on your life. Healthy escapism, that's temporary relief. It recharges you, maybe sparks creativity or insight, enhances empathy, and crucially, it helps you return to reality feeling better equipped, maybe with a fresh perspective.
Like a strategic retreat, a mental reset.
Exactly. Unhealthy escapism, that's more like chronic avoidance. It becomes the default way to cope. It leaves you feeling maybe numb or drained or even guilty afterwards. It starts replacing engagement with real-life problems or relationships.
So a break versus a bypass.
That's a great way to put it. The sources offer some signs to look out for. Healthy signs include: you can stop when you want or need to. You generally feel better or refreshed after. It inspires you or calms you down. It fits reasonably within your life, and it's just one of your coping strategies, not the only one.
And the warning signs for unhealthy escapism.
Feeling anxious or depressed after you stop, consistently using it to put off responsibilities, regularly losing track of huge chunks of time, needing more and more intense stimulation to get the same effect, and noticing it's negatively impacting your relationships, work, or basic self-care.
So it's less about the specific movie or game and more about the pattern, the intention, the frequency.
That's the hierarchy they seem to suggest. Intention first, why are you doing this? Restoration or avoidance. Then balance, how much is it taking over? Is it crowding other things out? And then, yeah, the content, is it engaging you actively, like TOTM, or just passively numbing you?
And it's okay to sometimes just watch junk TV. Not every escape needs to be a profound theater of the mind experience.
Absolutely. The sources stress this. Sometimes you just need to switch off with something easy. That's fine in moderation. It becomes problematic when that passive, maybe less nourishing stuff becomes your main way of dealing with stress or finding identity or regulating your mood. That's where the framework helps. Frequency, duration, control, aftermath, and that crucial ratio.
Right, the ratio between consumption and production.
This feels really key. Consumption is taking things in necessary but passive, easy to overdose on. Production is putting things out, creating, writing, building, solving problems active, often more deeply satisfying and nourishing. Healthy escapism, the sources suggest, often involves a balance, or maybe even leads from consumption to production, sparking ideas or insights. If it's only consumption, always passive, never leading anywhere, it risks becoming purely anesthetic.
Wow. Okay, this has definitely reframed a lot for me about how I think about my own habits. Bringing it all together then, what are the big final insights we can pull from these sources?
One powerful idea is framing imagination itself as a form of resistance. In a world increasingly designed for passive consumption, actively engaging your theater of the mind, building those internal worlds, is like tending a garden algorithms can't fully control. Escapism, viewed this way, isn't just running from life, but maybe escaping the constant noise that stops you from deeply experiencing it.
And revisiting that idea of escapism as a mirror.
Yeah, instead of just seeing it as denial, maybe see it as reflecting our inner state. The shape of our escapes might mirror our wounds, our lacks, our desires. And theater of the mind offers a gentler, more constructive mirror, allowing you to build within that longing, rather than just passively consuming something to numb it.
The loop of creation idea, escapism as potential incubation.
Right. When it's active, like TOTM, escapism isn't just zoning out. It can be a space for ideas to germinate, for possibilities to be explored, like rehearsing different ways of being. The danger isn't going into that imaginative space, maybe, but getting stuck there, failing to bring back the treasure, the insight, the creative spark, like in the hero's journey.
And that point about friction being necessary for meaning.
Yeah, fast, frictionless media gives easy pleasure, but maybe bypasses the struggle where real meaning is forged. The theater of the mind reintroduces that productive friction, the pauses, the ambiguity, the effort required to visualize and interpret. You earn the experience. That effort, that participation creates ownership and deeper resonance. You remember it because you helped make it.
I also like the point about theater of the mind being inherently communal, even when done alone.
It's a lovely thought, isn't it? Reading is a relationship between author and reader across time and space. RPGs are literally shared imagination. Even listening to a story feels like an intimate connection, a world whispered just for you. Passive consumption can feel isolating, but active imagination, even solitary, feels relational somehow.
And finally, the counterintuitive idea. Sometimes escaping reality helps you see it more clearly.
Right.
Stepping into metaphor, myth, story modes that rely heavily on theater of the mind can allow access to emotional truths or perspectives that are hard to grasp directly. It's like a shadow classroom, as one source put it, where complex human stuff can be explored more safely through the lens of imagination.
So wrapping this all up, maybe the most resonant final takeaway from these sources is simply this. You are the medium.
Yes. Ultimately, you're not just the passive recipient of media or escapism. You are the stage, the interpreter, the co-creator, the form your escapism takes, the patterns it falls into, what it reveals about you that's not just dictated by the content. It emerges from your relationship to it, your conscious choices, your habits of engagement.
Whether it ends up being healing or hollowing depends not only on what you consume, but on how consciously you step into that escape. And, maybe crucially, whether you choose to come back, changed.
A powerful thought to end on. It really is. Thank you so much for sharing these sources and digging into them with us. Hopefully this gives all of you listening something to think about regarding the worlds you visit, and maybe the incredible worlds you already have the power to build inside yourselves.